Greetings from the International Council for Small Business. This is Ayman El Tarabishy, ICSB Executive Director and Deputy Chair of the Department of Management at the George Washington University. We'll start in 10 seconds or less. Greetings again. We are delighted to be in another ICSB Exchange webinar. And tonight we have a fantastic lineup of panelists and also facilitators for this session. But let me start first with the title of the session is Empowering MSMEs and Entrepreneurs to Help Us Achieve the SDGs. The presenter for tonight is Dr. Chantal Carpentier, Chief of Office of the Secretary General for New York Office, United Nations, Conference on Trade and Development. I am also delighted to announce that tonight's session will be facilitated by Dr. Alex DeNoble, Professor in the Management Department in the College of Business at San Diego State University. He is also the Executive Director of the San Diego State University Lab and Entrepreneurship Center. So with that, what I'd like to do now, in brief terms here, what I'd like to do first is introduce Dr. Alex DeNoble, just to welcome him, and then we will introduce together Dr. Chantal Carpentier. Dr. Alex DeNoble, greetings.
Thank you, Ayman. It's a pleasure for me to be here and to see how we are reimagining how we can disseminate these extremely valuable discussions. So thank you for having me.
Absolutely, and we are delighted. Actually, we're making a little bit of history tonight that you will be facilitating this session, the ICSB Exchange webinar series with Dr. Chantal Carpentier from the United Nations, UNCTAD. Dr. Chantal, greetings.
Greetings, how are you?
We are doing well. We are delighted to have you with us today. And with ICSB Exchange, you have been an absolute great partner of ICSB and many of our partners as well. So we're just delighted to have you here in this chaotic time. But the topic is compelling, it's urgent. So we are just excited to have you here. The order is that you will do the presentation, and then Dr. Alex DeNoble will take it from there and facilitate the session. With that, the floor is yours. Just tell me, Ayman, hit next or just next, and I'll move the slides for you.
That sounds great. I still don't see the slide, however.
Okay, you don't see the slide on your computer?
Oh, I thought you would put, okay, I have them on my computer. I hope everybody can see them.
Yes, please go ahead.
Okay. Excellent. So good evening, everyone. I'm actually talking to you from Canada, thanks to this technology that we have. It's a pleasure that I'm here with Ayman and Alex and you tonight to talk about the very important role of MSMEs and entrepreneurs to help achieve the SDGs. And I want to start by saying why at the UN we say MSMEs and not SMEs. And because at UNCTAD especially, we work mostly with developing countries, and a lot of developing countries have micro enterprises, mostly one person, two person, family, small enterprise, oftentimes informal. And therefore, we do talk about micro, small, medium enterprises. So from now on, you're going to hear me talk about micro MSMEs. So what I'd like to do is to go over the Sustainable Development Goals, because some of you may not be aware of them, and then talk about the MSMEs and the role that they can play in achieving the SDGs, and that's the conventional view. Then what I'd like to do is the MSMEs traditional constraint, which most of us are aware of, and then quickly go in terms of the transformational view. That is the transformation that the MSMEs can have on achieving the SDGs. And then what are the constraints to that transformative role that MSMEs can have? Then talk about how we can help MSMEs help us achieve the SDGs, and then give you a little bit about background about what the UNCTAD's work on MSMEs and some good news that are fresh off the press from today. So if we can go to the next, Ayman. I'm on slide 3 now. So what are the Sustainable Development Goals? Next. No, on slide 4, please. So many of you are probably aware of the Millennium Development Goals. They ran from 2000 to 2015. There were 8 of them, and they were mostly social goals. Access to education, halving poverty in the world, health goals, child mortality, etc., etc. When we decide at the end of the 2015, which was the end of the Millennium Development Goals period, we did a review of the progress made on the MDGs and then start talking about what's going to come after the MDGs at the same time that we got a mandate at the UN to actually, at the Rio Plus 20 conference in 2012, to actually negotiate the Sustainable Development Goals. And so if we can go to the next slide, Ayman, on slide 5, I want to take a little bit of time to explain to you the difference between the MDGs and the SDGs. Somebody is not mute. Ayman, can we mute everybody? I hear somebody playing with their papers. So basically, the major differences between the MDGs and the SDGs is by whom it was done. So the MDGs were negotiated by a handful of experts, Under Secretary General and Kofi Annan, and basically over the weekend came up with some of the Millennium Declaration ideas and then extracted some 8 goals out of there. As opposed to that, the SDGs were negotiated over 1.5 years with all of our member states at the table, as well as the major groups of civil societies, which are trade union, business, NGOs, youth group, women's group, science, technology, innovation groups. So you had all of the sectors of civil society represented over 1.5 years to negotiate those goals. How they were negotiated? Basically through a working group. And there was so much demand from our member state that we were supposed to have a working group of 30 people that would negotiate the SDGs. And instead, we ended up having 60 and then 90 because there was trios of countries that were sitting on the same seat, not literally, trust me, so they could be at the table to negotiate the SDGs. And the focus is also very different. As I said, the MDGs were mostly social. The SDGs address every single aspect of sustainable development, the economic, the environmental, and the social issues. The MDGs didn't talk about how we're going to achieve them. We only had the what. We didn't have the how. Under the SDGs, we have means of implementation under each of the SDGs, and then the SDG 17 is about partnership and means of implementation to achieve each of the goals. The level of ambition is very different. While the MDGs were trying to eliminate extreme and reduce poverty by 50%, the SDGs are all in terms of absolute. We want to end poverty in all forms everywhere. We want to eliminate hunger. We want to eliminate lack of education. We want to make sure we have universal access to health, which we can see now with the COVID-19, why that would be very important. Because we wouldn't be where we are now under the COVID-19 spread if we were more advanced in the SDGs. The reach is also very different. Under the MDGs, we basically were talking about poverty, health, gender. We didn't address the root causes of poverty and inequality, which we are addressing under the SDGs. And as importantly, the MDGs were pretty much a pact between developing and developed nations. So the developing countries agreed to implement the 8 MDGs, and the developed world was supposed to help them, give them some financing, but also give them the capacity and the support to be able to implement those goals, which we've not done as much as we were supposed to. The SDGs are for every single country on the planet. While some countries have to work more on poverty alleviation and hunger alleviation, some of our countries definitely have to work more on sustainable consumption and production, as well as climate change and emission of CO2s and methane. Next slide, Ayman. The one cool thing about the SDGs is that though there's 17 individual one that covers pretty much every aspect of our life and the economy, social and environmental issues, they are extremely interrelated. And this is basically an analysis of how they are related at the target level. We have 17 goals and 169 targets. So if you look at all of the bigger circle are the goal, and then the little circles are the targets. And you can see how much there's relation between each of their goals. So you can have synergies, but you also can have trade-off. And if you work on any three of the SDGs, you work on them all. That's one good thing. But the other thing is if you try to work on them individually and not take into account the trade-off, then you may advance one of the goals while regressing on the other goal. So that's why it's important to not work in silo. Next slide. So what's the conventional view of the MSMEs and entrepreneurship? The Agenda 2030 agenda and the SDGs actually take into account the role of the MSMEs. Why? Because MSMEs represent 70% of the formal and 90% of total employment in developing countries. And worldwide, 95% of the firm, and 50% of the GDP is generated from MSMEs. And we know before the COVID-19 and the massive layout that we're seeing, we knew that to achieve the SDGs, because Africa and Asia, especially Africa, the fastest growing region in the world, is also the youngest region in the world. And we need to create 6 million new jobs between now and 2030 if we want to just maintain the level of employment we had before the COVID-19. We, after the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, ended up having countries like Spain with 25% unemployment rate, and that is not sustainable. But MSMEs and entrepreneurs can actually create more jobs. Next slide. As I said, the SDGs and the 2030 agenda does recognize this role of entrepreneurship and SMEs, and specifically in goal 4 under target 4.4, as you can see here, it actually calls on substantially increasing the number of youth and adults who have relevant skills, including technical and vocational skills for employment and decent jobs and entrepreneurship. So we need to provide training for our youth so they can actually be entrepreneurs and create jobs. We also have under 8.3 target, they promote development-oriented policies that support productive activity, decent job creation, entrepreneurship, creativity, innovation, and encourage the formalization and growth of SMEs. So this is what is it that we can do to help the MSMEs help us. And then on the 9.3, it increase access to SMEs to financial services and integration into the value chains and market. We all know the shortage of financial access to finance for MSMEs worldwide, but especially in developing countries. Next slide. Now, what are the traditional constraints that MSMEs face? We, for people that work in developing countries, we all know that there are some additional constraints than the one that we see in developed nations. So I'd just like to go over them real quickly. And those were covered in our Interagency Task Force on Financing for Development 2019 report that UNCTAD, the WTO, the IMF, the World Bank, and UNDP contribute to, coordinated by DESA. So what are these constraints? Limited access to information. Where are the market? How can I access them? Limited access to strategic resources, such as public access to public procurement calls. Lack of adequate financing, we covered that. Scaling challenges. It's the person may have the capacity to grow their business up to a certain level, but once you become a bigger business, additional skills are needed. Unreliable, unaffordable electricity. UNCTAD's Least Developed Country Report 2017 actually documented that companies, small businesses may lose up to 25% of their monthly time because of lack of access to electricity. Unfavorable business environment, lack of competitiveness in market concentration, where seeing now a large concentration and rapid concentration of markets, especially as we're seeing as the digitalization of the economy is growing. Lack of online trade readiness and vulnerability to market failures are all constraints that we've also documented. Now, what can be the role of the MSMEs and entrepreneurs in a transformative view? Next slide, I'm now on slide 13. So this is a slide that was originally developed by the Club of Rome and the Stockholm Resilience Center to try to make sense of the SDGs and the hierarchy and the linkages between them. So basically you have at the bottom of this cylinder the planet. So you have the goals on clean water and sustainable consumption, production, climate change, life on the water, and then life on land. So these are the biodiversity and all of the resources of the earth. Then you have the people, the poverty, the hunger, the education, the health, and the gender issues. And then you have more of the economic layer. And then you have peace and partnership, without which you can't have a balance between those. So the idea is, how do you grow the prosperity of all the people while being within the resources, the limited of the resources of the planet, so you don't achieve some of the goal on the top of this cylinder at the expenses of the one on the purple and on green at the bottom. So for that, we need transitions. Next slide, Ayman. So, and it's worthwhile to mention that these transitions are not necessarily costly. They also can represent business opportunities for SMEs and the entrepreneurs that can crack the nut of how to, for instances, do good while doing well. There are 785 million people that still lack basic drinking water services. Somebody can find a way to reach and give affordable, reliable access to water to these 785 million people. That's a big market opportunities. There's 3 billion people without basic hand washing facilities at home. Again, another big business opportunity. 701 million people still practice open defecation, sanitary issues. These are all business opportunities. Tuberculosis, now COVID-19, 1.5 million, less than sorry, this is a typo, less than 0.5 million right now, thank God, affected. 840 million people around the world are without access to modern electricity. That's a major market. A lot of those, the majority of those are in sub-Saharan Africa, and so on. So the the Business Council has estimated that there's $12 trillion of business opportunities in achieving the SDGs. And we believe that the SMEs and entrepreneurs have the nimbleness and the ability to pivot better than the bigger companies to take advantage of these business opportunities. Next slide, please. So, though the traditional view is that if we want to invest in SMEs because they're going to help create jobs, they're going to grow the economy, and they are going to have that impact, there's actually one approach that we tend to ignore, which is empowering small, medium enterprises and entrepreneurs to be able to capture that sectorial approach where you have that arrow there of business opportunities of providing all those services that I was just mentioning and the basic access within the limited resources of the planet. That would create large opportunities for our MSMEs. So what are the constraints then for our MSMEs to be able to take advantage of these business opportunities? Next slide. Next slide on 17. The Global Compact actually has some MSMEs that have joined them. And if you look at the top graph on this slide, you can see that the motivation for MSMEs to join the UN Global Compact. And on top, what you see, it's very small, but it says commitment to learn and implement sustainability principle. So they actually joined the Global Compact to be able to implement the sustainable principle. However, if you look at the little graph on the right, this is how much they use the material. So 47% of SMEs said they're not using at all the material provided by the Global Compact to help them. And then if you look at the graph at the bottom of this slide, why they're not using the material. The largest reason, limited internal capacity and resources, 70%. But then the resources and activities provided by the Global Compact are of limited relevance to my company. The support from my Global Compact local network does not fully address the need of my company, and so on. And it's not in the right language. So from this small sample of SMEs, we see that we're not providing the right capacity and information in the right format, in the right language to our SMEs to be able to be the good citizen doing well while doing good. Now, next slide. What does that mean in terms of COVID-19 and SMEs? We all know that as entrepreneurs, that no crisis should go untapped. And what could we do in terms of ensuring that the $5 trillion that the G20 is putting forward, some of it is actually targeted toward the sustainable economy, not the old economy? And how do we ensure that 50%, could we work together to ensure that 50% of these funds go to MSMEs, to avoid further concentration of market at the expense of MSMEs and create jobs and maintain the job that the MSMEs create? Could we go even further and ensure that 50% of this money goes to women-owned MSMEs, so we actually rebalance the imbalance we have right now in terms of ownership by women? Now, can we prepare for the next crisis? Could we ensure that we actually have in place a fund that is actually available for MSMEs the day after the crisis hit? That MSMEs, there's a window they can get access. So before they have to lay out their employees, and before they actually have to take on additional loan and scramble, can we ensure that they actually have a window at the national or international level to ensure that they have access to resources to keep the economy going and keep the job that we need so badly in a crisis, whether they're natural or economics? Can we raise awareness together about the MSMEs and their ability to reach the SDGs much better in an integrated way, taking advantage of the synergies across the SDGs than maybe multinationals? And how do we support innovators, incubators, and the deployment of the solution that MSMEs and entrepreneurs can come up with? Because of course we can find solutions, and I do believe, and most of technologists believe, that the solution to each of these problems does exist. What we don't have is the financial and economic model to deploy those solutions at scale and the partnership needed to reach the furthest behind. Next slide, slide 19. Let me go in terms of what is it that UNCTAD and some of the other UN agencies are doing to help MSMEs right now before we open for questions. Next slide. So for those of you that don't know UNCTAD, we are the UN Conference on Trade and Development, created in 1964 when developing countries were actually decolonizing and joining an economic and financial system that was not created by them or for them, and try to find a better way, a more balanced way for them to join that system and take advantage of that system. So UNCTAD is the focal point within the UN on finance, technology, investment, sustainable development, and entrepreneurship. We work through 3 pillars: consensus building through our Trade and Development Board, research and analysis, and technical assistance directly to member states, which are the developing countries. Our headquarters in Geneva, and we have a small office here in New York that I lead, and one in Addis Ababa that is supporting the African Continental Free Trade Agreement negotiations, the countries to negotiate that agreement. Next slide. So quickly, under each of these: consensus building, research and analysis, and technical assistance, what is it that we do? Under consensus building, we work with our Trade and Development Board to develop tools for our member states. So we have an entrepreneurship policy framework that, instead of having countries go and say, oh, let's give a little bit of finance, let's give a little bit of capacity, let's give a little bit of this, to actually address the entrepreneurship ecosystem into one whole. We also have an entrepreneurship resolution that UNCTAD support within the General Assembly that is led by Israel. and it's been existing now for since 2014. And we also work on enterprise promotion and market access for entrepreneurs. On research and analysis, we produce several reports on trade and development, the world investment, these developed countries, technology innovation that you might have seen and many of you may use in your research. We also work a lot on, we have a partnership on e-trade for all with 35 international organizations to ensure a one-stop shop for developing countries to be able to take advantage of e-commerce. And we do e-trade readiness assessment for them. On the technical assistance, we come in at the request of member states. We do not push any of our capacity with all them writing to our Secretary General, their ministers of finance, economy, or trade, writing to us and asking for our help to establish an MProtect Center for entrepreneurial center, training center. Business linkages, e-trade readiness, the e-trade for all, green export, bio-trade, investment policy, trade policies, and so on. Next slide. So this gives you an example of our entrepreneurship policy framework for implementing guidance. So this is for member states. Then after developing that guidance document, we, with the Commonwealth, develop a adapted version for youth entrepreneurship that have some specific constraint. And we also, with our colleague at IOM, the UN Migration Agency and the UN Right Agency, work on a policy guide on entrepreneurship for migrant and refugees. These are just sample of what we do to give you a sense. Next slide. And we support entrepreneurship, as I said, instead of having a kind of a trying little things at a time, we try to pool the knowledge from all of the countries we work together and try to address the entrepreneurship ecosystem in a systemic and holistic approach through all of these steps that you see there. Next slide. We also want to foster entrepreneurship for women. So we do have a Women Entrepreneurship Business Award that we allocate every 2 years at our World Investment Forum to raise the awareness and the visibility of women entrepreneurs for younger women to follow. On next slide. I'm also excited to say that on research and analysis, we've just embarked on a partnership with ICSB to develop a research paper on MSMEs to achieve the SDGs. We want to go deeper into what I just present to you and be able to provide guidance and tools for developing countries to be able, and not just developing countries and developed countries, to be able to help the MSMEs help us achieve the SDGs in an integrated way. And in conclusion, today, this morning, we have a development account project. This is where we test new tools in the context of the COVID-19. We just got a project approved to support MSMEs in light of the COVID-19, where we will create a one knowledge hub worldwide, and we will have all of the UN agencies and our partners come together to provide technical assistance for MSMEs worldwide. So I'm delighted about that. I'll stop here, Alex and Ayman, and hopefully we can have a discussion and I can answer some questions.
Yes, thank you, Chantaline. That was a very fascinating discussion or presentation. Now we get into the discussion, but I like how you think on a global scale, and it's important for us to be thinking this way because there's no doubt the MSMEs have a very significant role to play, especially with respect to economic development and so forth. But in light of the current situation, you know, we're in this this particular environment. I'm hearing terms like the new normal, social distancing, digital economy, and so forth. What do you think is the future of MSMEs in terms of the SDGs, given what's happening currently.
Thank you, Alex. And Ayman, can you move to the next slide so we do some promotion on our E-Trade for Women where I answer that question? Thank you, Alex. So I'm hopeful in part because we have been working together, you and Ayman and others, as well as other of our partners with the OECDs and others. And by the way, the OECD is a perfect partner for us at UNCTAD because we focus on developing countries. The OECD focus on the developed world. So by bringing our knowledge together, we can be having a greater impact. I'm hopeful also because we had started working on this and now we have an opportunity to push this agenda forward. What I mean by that is we were able to, when we were asked by the Secretary General for each agencies at the UN to provide input for the G20 that was held virtually this week, we basically included, I submitted the MSME role as well as some other colleagues, and it actually stuck. My SG put it in and it stayed in there. And so now we have the MSMEs having being featured within the packages. It is also featured in the money that the UN, the Secretary General just issued a report today in response to the COVID-19 and basically saying it is a humanitarian crisis. It is a health crisis. It's a humanitarian crisis, but it's also a socio-economic crisis. And we all agree that one of the pillars needs to be MSMEs. And so we will be focusing and pulling all of our weight behind supporting the MSMEs. And I do believe that we need to create jobs right now. We need people to have money. And to do that, there's nothing better than the MSMEs. Everybody on this call knows that. And so I think that we need, if we can help the MSMEs pass this crisis, if we can help them adapt to the fourth industrial revolution, which so far they've been a little reluctant, in part because they don't necessarily have the in-house capacity. I do believe that the MSMEs can come out stronger.
Mm-hmm. You know, you talk about the fourth industrial revolution, these emerging technologies, and I think this current crisis will rapidly accelerate the movement in the fourth industrial revolution, especially with respect to the digital economy. And as we transition to a digital world, I'm focused on your slide that talks about the challenges that the MSMEs have, limited access to information, vulnerability to market failure, unreliability to affordable business environments. My question to you is, if these MSMEs, if they don't have access to the technical capabilities and hardware, what do we have to do to bridge that divide?
That's a good question, Alex. And as I mentioned, we were able, UNCTAD and the UN has 5 regional economic and social commission around the world. And as I said this morning, it was agreed that UNCTAD and these regional economic social commission will create a knowledge hub, a global one and then a regional one, each of the 5 regions, to specifically address these challenges that the MSMEs face. If you think before COVID-19, there was no one hub or no one place that brought all of the UN capacity, the OECD, the IMF, the World Bank, the WTO's capacity behind the MSMEs. Now we are creating this. Also with ICSB, the partnership that we have, and with the OECD, by pulling our capacity together, we can actually help the MSMEs make that hump. We are concerned at UNCTAD because there's a disruption already with the trade and technological war pre-COVID-19. We saw that there was disruption to some of the supply chains. And as supply chain were already being disrupted, now they've even been more disrupted. And UNCTAD is actually calling for reopening the port and ensuring maritime transport to maintain the capacity of MSMEs to be able to produce. We're going to see a lot of relocalization of production and probably shorter supply chain following because of the fourth industrial revolution, but also because of COVID-19. And so it is upon us to ensure that MSMEs do not are not excluded from these opportunities. At UNCTAD, we also have the digital economy report we published last year that call on all of these platforms for the fourth industrial revolution. All these platforms from the data economy, the digital economy, are basically monopolistic by nature. And we're calling on the world to address those monopolies so that the MSMEs, again, can actually take part in the digital economy.
You know, that's, I think this is, you know, a unique time that we're all facing. And these are massive challenges. I think we've got a unique partnership in the works between UNCTAD and ICSB, because as you know, ICSB, our organization is global and our network is made up of globally of educators, researchers, policy, and practitioners. And so, you know, there's so much potential here. We need to explore how we can better work together to help achieve these goals. Some ideas on possible next steps. How can we work together, ICSB and UNCTAD, to address these issues?
Yeah, and it's a very good question. And if you recall, Alex, I had a wonderful webinar with one of your class a few months back, and I was supposed to come back, but this COVID-19 changed the plans. But one of your students actually raised an issue and said, because I had said, we need partnership between developing countries and developed countries, but not just at the state level, but at the university and educational institutional level. Because you have students in California at your school that, of course, are maybe more aware of financial instrument and financial mechanism and entrepreneurship issues, while in developing countries where a lot of the demand is, these entrepreneurs who are very savvy will be very much aware of their market, which your student won't be. But by putting them together, the two can come up with magnificent capacity to actually achieve the SDG and create business opportunities. And so I'm very hopeful that through this partnership, through the universities, through the MSMEs, and through the ICSB, we can actually help MSMEs help us achieve the SDGs.
You know, so to our global audience, we have some unique opportunities in front of us to be difference makers, to be part of the solution, to apply our intellect and our capabilities, working in this kind of a partnership to address these massive issues. And it's going to take some creativity, some innovation, and some reimagination for us to achieve these goals together. But we're in it for the long run, and we look forward to working with you. So, Ayman, I'd like to turn it back to you to see if there are any questions from our audience.
Oh, I think you started something big here. We have a ton of questions here coming in.
Oh, good.
But let's start with some recognition here. And on behalf of ICSB and Alex DeNoble and the ICSB board and the president, we want to recognize you, Chantaline, for being a partner, an original partner with ICSB back in 2016 when we pitched the idea to the United Nations about creating an international name day for MSMEs, right? And back then, everybody looked at us and said, who really cares about micro and small medium enterprises? And we have to give you recognition and applaud you and UNCTAD and the leadership for stepping up and saying, we need you. This is a great idea. We are fully behind you as an agency. And you worked with us with the permanent mission of Argentina, with Ambassador Martin, to put this proposal together. And now all the world is talking about micro and small medium enterprises, but yet ICSB and UNCTAD and OECD and ILO and many partners in the original stood with us from the beginning saying, this is important, let's plan for it. So we want to give you recognition on that front. More importantly, it's not just coming from ICSB. There's a message that just came from Kenya, and it goes like this. I am Moses Ngozo from Kenya. Very good presentation, and I commend UNCTAD for its assistance to developing countries, especially Africa. In the recent times, you organized 2 forums in Kenya, which I attended and got to know your support to MSMEs. Keep it up. So with that, I want to just give you a brief moment to thank everybody, and especially Moses.
Well, thank you so much, Ayman, and thank you. I'm a true believer that we need, there are rare windows of opportunities in our lives and in our both personal and professional life. And we have been working hard together, all of us, and we were prepared when this crisis happened, and therefore we are ready to help the MSMEs. It's not going to be easy, let's face it, and we're going to have to work hard still. But I do believe that because we worked hard since a while back for the SME Day, for the entrepreneurship resolution, and helping the SMEs. Yesterday, UNCTAD released a report on the cost to developing countries of COVID-19. We think it's hard to be confined to our houses and having to shut the economy and not go out. But many countries, I mentioned people that don't have access to water, running water in their house. How are they supposed to wash their hands? They have so many of these people in the informal economy. They do not have a job. They do not have money. They can't buy food for their family if they don't go out that day. How do they keep that social distancing? We estimate that we need trillions of dollars to be invested into developing countries if we want to avoid, we're all in this together. And so we're calling on basically debt relief for the debt services for developing countries, because they can't now, because the economy is being shut down, they can't service their debt. We're calling for some of their debt to be actually forgiven. And we're asking the IMF to use the drawing rights, special drawing rights, so that to create some liquidity for those countries. And so UNCTAD is very committed to this, and I'm happy to follow this discussion. And thank you so much for my colleague from Kenya.
Great. So now let's get to business. Enough recognition here. Let's get to business here. There's a question that comes really very forceful here, saying one of the opportunities for MSMEs is subcontracting as a means to learn and grow. Is there a platform there in developing countries capable of offering that connection of subcontracting? Do you know of any?
That's a good question. I don't want to say something stupid or something that I'm not sure of. Mm-hmm. I'm pretty sure that we do, not necessarily UNCTAD, but some of our colleagues from UNDP and others. But we are in the process. For instance, in developing countries, it may not. We have in developing country, we have in agriculture for sure. What we need to do is subcontracting in other area where we can bring through subcontracting, bring the knowledge and the technology. And I hope that through this hub that we're going to create in the next weeks, we can actually provide that. So I'm taking note of that. And if you want to share more information on that, please share with me.
Okay, great.
Chantaline, I mean, just to add to that, I mean, as subcontracting takes place, I think it's really important for the MSMEs to have the capacity. So we really need to work on capacity building. The the subcontract that goes out to the MSMEs, they're capable of delivering, and that's going to be an important piece.
Yep.
So this question is actually, let me ask the question to Alex first so he can comment on it and then rephrase the question for Chantaline. So it's coming to you, Alex, first, in which you can comment on it and rephrase it for Chantaline here. And here, this is how it goes here. So Alex, I'm going to ask you to put a couple of hats on. I'm going to ask you to put a hat as a professor. I'm also going to ask you to put a hat as the director of the center at your school, as also as the past president of our partner, USASP, and also as an SVP of a partnership for ICSB. Here comes the question. So far, little emphasis has been mentioned on the role of universities in empowering SMEs. What are the role of universities, especially in developing countries?
Well, that's a lot of hats, Simon. But clearly, we at the universities are in the business of preparing the next generation of entrepreneurs. This is where it begins. We see them as embryos. These are the seeds. These are people that come to us. I was about to say these are the young people, but we deal with lifelong learners and people that want to embark on an entrepreneurial path need training, need skills, and need mindset, to develop a mindset to identify opportunities and have the capabilities to develop the kind of business models and then ultimately businesses that can address these opportunities. So look at the universities in one aspect on the front end, but then our researchers, we need to fundamentally understand what's happening with respect to Industry 4.0. How is that changing business models? How do we deal with these changes? And how can we work with MSMEs to respond to these kinds of challenges? And a lot of that is going to come from our fundamental understanding of these dynamics through our talented research community. So that's how I'd respond to it. And we need to be more active and engaged.
Thank you. So the question to you, Chantaline, then, based on what Alex mentioned here, but also it ties to what our new journal, the Journal for the International Council for Small Business, which is GISP, which you have worked with Dr. Jeffrey Alves here. What's your reaction to this? How would you comment to the role of universities to support you? Alex mentioned researchers, and what's your take on this?
Yeah, it's a complex, but let me try to address it in several ways. One way is, and no blame to you guys, but at the same time, some blame. UNCTAD did a review of the case studies in business schools. And basically, I try to remember the exact, but I believe that it's 84% of your case studies in business school are from developed countries. Well, are you doing a favor to your student if the growth market is in developing market and 84% of your case studies are from developed countries? The second thing is we also look at how many of these case studies are from the least developed countries, the poorest of the poorest, and that's 1.4%. So maybe in the North, we need to do a better job in adapting our curriculum to help our own entrepreneur to take advantage of not just in national market, but international market as well. And especially educate them about the SDGs. There is a educational group that can the education for SDG, what is it called? There's a group anyway that of universities and higher education on the SDGs that can be joined, that universities commit to teach sustainable development goals, practice sustainable development, and better prepare the student to take to contribute. Second, I'd say is we need more exchanges between the North and the South, both of professors and students. We as part of a partnership, we had Jack Ma, the former CEO of Alibaba, as our advisor for 2 years at UNCTAD on our digital economy work. And basically, we brought him, my Secretary General brought him to Africa for the first time. He was amazed at the entrepreneurial spirit of young African. He couldn't believe it. And so he basically committed $10 million from the Alibaba Foundation to, we help select some young entrepreneurs, and then we train them, and then they get trained at the Alibaba Center there. We also have Protect centers in developing countries, but it's not enough. We have millions and millions of students to be trained. So how do we scale that up? How do we have more exchanges between the student, between the professors? Now we all have to work remote on our computers. Can we use this as an advantage? We don't all have to fly to Africa or Asia or Latin America. How do we do more of these exchanges? I'm putting it right back to you, Ayman and Alex.
Yeah. Yeah, you know, Chantaline, you talked about the case studies, and you may have a point, but at the same time, that is only one sliver of the educational programming that goes on at very progressive universities. We bring, I mean, because of our geographic proximity in San Diego, for example, we are very Latin focused, Latin America, Hispanic focused, and so it's more than just case studies. It's bringing Mexican students, for example, here to look at our incubators, to look at our facilities, but also to bring our students into Mexico as an example, and to promote these kind of student-to-student exchanges. You know, and I know we're active in that area, but so many other schools are truly engaging as well, and so it really does go beyond the case studies. But yes, we do need to fundamentally use case studies in developing context to heighten the awareness of our students.
And more university like San Diego University to do the same with these exchanges, and more systemic.
So Chantaline, just to get this on record here, you are basically calling upon ICSB, and maybe let's be more specific, on our new journal to generate more output in terms of cases or other educational output focused on developing countries in Africa or even Latin America or other parts of the world. Is that correct? Is that what you're saying?
That is correct. That is correct. And me and Ayman and I have been having that discussion a few times, but I want to repeat it here. We have a system to reward our professors, which is how many peer-reviewed journal articles you get accepted. That's all you get your promotion. And basically, to have a peer-reviewed journal article, you have to have innovative work. Our decision makers, what they need is not innovative work, is replication of something to make sure that it actually works. That solution is tested in several instances so that they can actually go to their parliament and say, look, it's been tested in this and their circumstances. And so we can actually feel confident we can put that in place and it's not going to be a failure. So I'm calling on the journal and ICSB to also not be afraid to have students duplicate and replicate some of the work so that we can be sure, our decision makers can be sure they can roll out those programs.
Okay. So we have our colleagues from Africa, and the words that are coming back to us is fantastic. And we would like to share your contact information so they can get going on it. This has taken more of an energy behind it. So fairly soon you'll see ICSB reacting to this call. I'll get the leadership involved from our journal, and also to say there's this discussion happening, and this is just absolutely fantastic. Let me ask another question that comes here. It comes from the role of UNCTAD in sharing potentially data sources, potentially areas where we can look at to help unleash our researchers, and both existing ones or even doctoral students, which play a critical role around the world. What's your reaction to this or comment to this, Chantaline? And especially with the work that Tatiana is doing in the UNCTAD office in Geneva.
Yeah, no, this is such a good point, and thank you, because I had forgotten about that. UNCTAD generates huge amount of data. All of it is free, available online. And we just actually signed the open data protocol, whatever it's called. And so I invite you to just Google UNCTAD and stats, and you'll find all the data on trade, on tariff, on trade, on maritime transport, on our MSMEs. We're now working on social entrepreneurship. We also, the one question that I really want to put out there is, how do we create a system by which we have so many questions, so many areas of research that we stumble upon as we try to find solution for these very complex problem in developing countries. And we could use so much of some of your students' classes to put their might and thinking, partnered with some student in developing countries to come up with solution to help us. I wrote in my article to the International Journal of International ICSB that the most valuable resource we have is our young mind. How do we, and they want to help. How do we find a system to put those questions out? Not just UNCTAD, but also all of our colleagues from UNDP and FAO and ILO that come up with these questions that we need your classes to go deep and develop those cases and these solutions.
Great, thank you. So we have 2 minutes left here. What I'd like to do is give Alex the floor to say maybe a closing remark, and then give it to Chantaline to also close. Alex, the floor is yours.
You know, I mean, I see this as only the opening dialogue. I mean, it's you've created something here, and we want to continue it. And for those of you that may have been aware of the California Entrepreneurship Educators Conference that we host every year, initially we had to cancel it. But then in consultation with Ayman and Chantaline and others, we decided to reimagine it. So watch for this conference to come online on April 16th and 17th for starters, and you'll be hearing more about it as we publicize it through ICSB, because it's going to bring the researchers together and the educators to start addressing some of the issues that were raised today.
Chantaline?
Thank you, Ayman. Thank you, Alex. And I look forward, Alex, to this reimagined, pivoted conference. I just want to thank everybody on this call for caring first, to be curious second. And I have no doubt if you're on this call, it's because you want to help MSMEs and you want to help achieve the SDGs. And we need all of us to be able to achieve that. And I know that together we can do it, but we can't be sitting down and waiting for others to do it. We need to do it ourselves. So I invite everybody that want to work with us to join forces and do this. And I want to thank you, Ayman, for inviting me to do this presentation, to give me the platform and the opportunity to talk to a broader audience in terms of what we do and how we can work together.
Dr. Chantaline, thank you very much. When the ICSB makes out a call to the family members call back, and you did call back, so you're part of the ICSB family, and we really appreciate you for taking the time to spend it with us, especially with your busy schedule with UNCTAD and everything that's going on. With that, I would like to announce tomorrow's webinar series. We actually have 2 of them, and I'm excited to present both of them here. We're switching times a little bit because we started with 6 p.m. Webinars to accommodate our global members here. But tomorrow we're going to start a little bit early at 10 a.m. to accommodate our members in Europe. And this is a sold-out webinar. It's basically sold out. But what happens is register anyhow, because some people don't show up and some seats become available. It's like a concert. Some seats become available here. So I encourage you to register for tomorrow for the sold-out webinar here, like the one tonight and the one yesterday with Jem. right? And this one is, I think it's one of the first ones we'll do here, is Meet the Author, which is, the book's title is Where to Play, 3 Steps for Discovering Your Most Valuable Market Opportunities, right? And it's in a new addition to the Lean tool set here. And it's just an absolutely fantastic book. And I had a call with him this morning. Dr. Mark Gruber is the Vice President of Innovation at EPFL, and he is also the Chair of Entrepreneurship there. But more importantly, he's also the Associate and as Deputy Editor of the Academy of Management Journal, AMJ. So he is just absolutely excited to join us tomorrow at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, which is a little bit in the early afternoon in Europe. So that's the first webinar at 10 a.m. and it's sold out, but I wish you luck to register. The next one here is our dear partners, USASB, will continue our fireside chat. So now USASB is holding the fireside chat and we're all going there. And it's the USASB ICSB fireside chat, and tomorrow at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. And we're just delighted with the presenters coming here. It's all on the ICSB.org, ICSB Exchange website, and we'll send out an email tonight with a recap of this, but also a link to register. So there are 2 fantastic webinars tomorrow. We're selling out a lot of these webinars here. A lot of people are joining us here. They see value proposition here. And with that, I want to thank our facilitator, Dr. Alex Noble. You've done fantastic here. This was the first one here, so we are delighted to have you facilitated. You should do more. And Dr. Chantaline, thank you so much for your time. With that, I want to end the chat with everybody. I want to thank you all for coming. Have a wonderful and safe time. Wash your hands.
Bye-bye.
Bye, Ayman. Thank you.
Bye-bye.